Get out of here, you old bum. I don't need you anymore for anything. Those words came from my own son's mouth. That same boy I held in my arms for entire nights, who I taught to walk, to talk, to be a man. These words echoed through the walls of the mansion I'd built with my husband over 40 years of marriage. I can still feel their impact in my chest like a slap. But what my son Felipe didn't expect was my reaction. Instead of tears, instead of pleas, I simply started to laugh. A laugh that came from the depths of my soul. A laugh that held a secret he didn't know. My name is Berenice Fontana, I'm 67 years old, and I'm here to tell the story of how my only son tried to discard me like an old piece of furniture after my husband Geronimo passed away. The story of how he thought he inherited millions of reis and, in the height of his arrogance, kicked me out of my own house, and mainly, the story of how a simple question changed everything. Did you read the entire will? You know, life has these twists that seem like a soap opera script, but they are as real as the air we breathe. I was born into a simple family in the countryside of Mato Grosso. I grew up watching my father work from dawn to dusk on land that wasn't his. I studied in public schools. I graduated in business administration with a lot of effort, dreaming of a better future. It was at a college party that I met Geronimo. He was a few years older, already had a small property, and dreamed big. We fell in love and together we built a soybean empire that stretched across thousands of hectares in Rondonópolis. When Felipe was born, I swore to myself that he would have everything I didn't have: private school, international trips, brand-name clothes. Maybe that was my mistake. I confused love with indulgence, I confused education with ease. Geronimo always warned me, Berenice, you're spoiling that boy. He needs to learn the value of work, of effort. But I always defended my son. Let him enjoy, Geronimo. We don't want him to suffer like we did. And so Felipe grew up, always having everything, never valuing anything. He attended 3 different colleges, dropped out of all of them, tried to manage a branch of our business, almost drove it to bankruptcy. Each failure came with an excuse, never an apology. Then he met Bianca, a model who never took off in her career. Beautiful, ambitious, and with a single goal in life, to find a rich man to support her. I saw the way Bianca looked at the jewelry Geronimo gave me, at the cars in the garage, at the paintings on the walls. Her eyes didn't shine with admiration, but with greed. This girl doesn't love our son, she loves our money, I once told Geronimo. He agreed with a tired sigh. Felipe will only learn when he hits rock bottom. When Geronimo got sick, it was as if the sun began to slowly fade from my sky. 3 years of fighting against aggressive cancer. 3 years in which I never left his side. I fell asleep in hospital chairs, learned more about medications and treatments than I ever wanted to know. Felipe showed up now and then, always in a hurry, always with some more important commitment. Bianca didn't even do that. She sent expensive flowers and cards written by a secretary. In the last months, Geronimo called me for a serious talk. With a weak but determined voice, she explained her intentions for the will. Berenice, you know Felipe isn't ready to take it all on. He'll squander the fortune we built in just a few years. I'm leaving him a lesson. And then she explained her plan, which seemed both cruel and necessary. I agreed with a heavy heart. It wasn't about money, it was about character. Geronimo's funeral was just as he always wanted, simple, with few speeches and plenty of wildflowers he loved so much. Felipe barely contained his impatience during the ceremony, checking his watch every 5 minutes. Bianca, dressed as if she were at a fashion show, accepted condolences with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. I noticed how the two whispered anxiously, like children waiting to open Christmas presents. 3 days later, Dr. Mauricio Pixoto, a longtime friend and family lawyer, called for the reading of the will at his office. Felipe and Bianca arrived before me, already settled in the best chairs. Sebastio, our caretaker for 30 years, and Antonia, our housekeeper, came with me. Geronimo had asked them to be witnesses. Luia, my daughter living abroad, couldn't come but was connected via video call. The reading began formally, with legal terms I already knew. When Dr. Mauricio read that Felipe would inherit 30 million, I saw him grip Bianca's hand so tightly that the knuckles turned white. His eyes sparkled in a way they never did for his living father. The reading continued, but Felipe and Bianca seemed to hear nothing more. They were lost in dreams of wealth, plans for extravagant spending. Little did they know. The next morning, I woke to the sound of doors being violently opened. Felipe barged into my room without knocking, followed by Bianca. "You have an hour to pack your things," he said, throwing an open suitcase on my bed. I tried to argue, to ask for explanations, but he wouldn't let me speak. We descended the mansion stairs, me dazed, being pushed by my own son. At the main entrance, where we had welcomed so many distinguished guests, Felipe threw my bags, hastily packed by Antonia while she cried, and pointed to the door. It was then that he said those words that marked my soul. "Get out, you old hag. I don't need you for anything anymore." Bianca smiled beside him, already wearing one of my pearl necklaces. Sebastio and Antonia watched the scene frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. Other staff members approached, drawn by the shouting. Time seemed to freeze. I felt 40 years of memories flash before my eyes in seconds. Felipe's birth, his first steps, the nights I stayed awake when he had a fever, the birthday parties I organized with such care, the problems I solved, the doors I opened for him, and now this. But I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel sadness, I felt a strange calm, as if Geronimo were by my side, holding my hand, telling me everything was going according to plan. I adjusted my sapphire necklace, the last gift he gave me on our 40th wedding anniversary, and simply started to laugh. My laughter echoed through the entrance hall, making everyone freeze. Felipe looked at me, confused, his arrogance giving way to a momentary hesitation. That's when I asked the question that would change everything. "Have you read the entire will, my son?" The expression on his face shifted. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. And it was at that exact moment I realized Geronimo's plan was working just as he had predicted. The lesson my husband wanted to teach our son was just beginning, and it would be the most important of all. Have you ever wondered how far someone would go for money? Have you imagined discovering a person's true character when they think they have all the power? Where are you from? Tell me in the comments. I want to know who's listening to me today. If you're new to the channel, subscribe so you don't miss the unfolding of this story, which still has many revelations ahead. The silence that followed my question was deafening, all eyes fixed on me, waiting for my next move. But to understand what happened in that moment, I need to go back in time and tell how we got there, how my Geronimo and I built everything from scratch. And how our son became the man who would one day kick me out of our home. I met Geronimo Fontana at a time when Mato Grosso was still considered the end of the world by many. I had just graduated in business administration and dreamed of working in big cities, maybe Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. He showed up at a college party, invited by an older mutual friend, with calloused hands from hard work but eyes that sparkled when he talked about the future. "I'm going to buy land in Rondonópolis," he told me that night while we danced. "The future of Brazil is in the Midwest, in agribusiness. You'll see." At the time, I thought it was just talk to impress. 3 months later, we were married, and I was moving into a small wooden house in what seemed like the middle of nowhere. We had 200 hectares, a used tractor, and many dreams. Our closest neighbors were almost an hour away, and the town was a distant spot we visited once a week for supplies. "Berenice, this is going to work," Geronimo told me every night, even when the harvest was poor, even when the rains didn't come, even when the bank threatened to take our land. And I believed him, not because I was naive, but because I saw his determination, his ability to learn from mistakes, to adapt. Those first years were tough. We woke up before the sun rose and worked until we could barely stand. I learned about planting, about harvesting, about negotiating with buyers. My business degree was worth more in that patch of Cerrado than it would ever be in any big city office. I kept the accounting books, planned the investments, negotiated with banks. Geronimo was the strength and the vision. I was the strategy and the organization. In the 5th year, we managed to buy another 500 hectares from the neighboring farm that was for sale. By the 8th year, we acquired our first new truck. By the 10th, we were known in the region as an example of agricultural management. The soybeans we planted were of high quality, our methods were efficient, and we began exporting directly. It was during this time that I discovered I was pregnant. After years of trying, almost giving up, Felipe arrived like a miracle. He was born strong, healthy, with his father's eyes and, according to the nurses, my hair. Geronimo cried when he held him for the first time. This tough man, who faced storms and creditors without flinching, melted into tears before that little being who united our blood. He will inherit all of this, Berenice, Geronimo said, looking out the hospital window at the horizon. We will build an empire for our son. And that's exactly what we did. In the following years, the Horizontes farm grew exponentially. We acquired more land. We diversified production, bought state-of-the-art machinery. When Felipe was 5, we finally built a large, comfortable brick house. By the time he was 7, we had an office in Cuiabá and were starting to venture into other businesses, a transportation company, a small processing industry, various investments. Luia was born when Felipe was 7. It wasn't a planned pregnancy, but we welcomed her with the same joy. While Felipe was restless and impulsive, Luia grew up observant and calculating. From a young age, she showed interest in the accounting books I kept, in spreadsheets, in numbers. Felipe, on the other hand, loved riding tractors with his father, greeting the employees, feeling important. As the business grew, our presence on the farm diminished. We built the mansion in Cuiabá. We hired Antonia as a housekeeper, a simple woman but with unwavering loyalty. Sebastio, who started as a general helper on the farm, showed such talent for management that Geronimo promoted him to foreman. This man has more common sense in his pinky finger than many a doctor, my husband used to say. Felipe grew up with privileges that Geronimo and I never had. He studied at the best schools, had private tutors, traveled abroad before turning 15. I tried to compensate for the absence that our work sometimes imposed by giving him everything he asked for. Geronimo disagreed with this approach. "You're raising a weak man," he told me one night after Felipe demanded, not asked, but demanded, an imported car at 18. "He needs to learn that things have value, that they are earned through effort." "He's just a boy," I argued. "He has time to learn." "And when will that time be, Berenice? When he's 30, 40, when I'm no longer here to teach him?" That last sentence hit me like a foreboding. Geronimo had always been a healthy man, but hard work takes its toll. The years of sun exposure, the stress of business, the sleepless nights during crises, all of this left invisible marks that would only show years later. Felipe went to college to study business administration, not out of passion, but because it was what we expected of him. He dropped out in his 2nd year, tried agronomy, then law. Nothing seemed to spark his interest for more than a few months. Meanwhile, Luia graduated with honors in economics, earned a master's degree abroad, and started working at an investment bank in London. The disagreements between the siblings began when Felipe, at 26, demanded a leadership position in the family business. Geronimo, against my wishes, yielded and put our son in charge of one of the smaller farms we had recently acquired. "He needs to learn hands-on," my husband justified. "Let's see what he's capable of." Months later, the farm was on the brink of bankruptcy. Felipe had let go of experienced employees to hire friends, invested in unnecessary machinery, and completely ignored the planting plan. Geronimo had to step in personally, working 18 hours a day to fix the damage. "It wasn't my fault," Felipe defended himself. "The weather was bad. The suppliers deceived me. The employees didn't cooperate." Always an excuse, never an admission of error. It was during this time that he met Bianca on a trip to Sao Paulo. She introduced herself as a model, but her career mainly consisted of VIP appearances at events and some photos in second-rate magazines. She was 28 and had a history of relationships with wealthy, much older men. When Felipe brought her to meet the family, I immediately saw what she was. Her eyes scanned our home, evaluating every piece, every object, as if she were taking inventory. She paid more attention to our possessions than to our words. When we mentioned the extent of the family business, I saw her face light up with a gleam that had nothing to do with love. "This girl is going to bring trouble," I told Geronimo that night. "She doesn't love our son, she loves what he represents." "Felipe is an adult," my husband replied, though I could see the worry in his eyes. He needed to make his own mistakes. The wedding happened just 4 months later. An extravagant ceremony that cost a fortune. Paid for, of course, by us. Bianca demanded the most expensive dress, the rarest flowers, the most luxurious party. Felipe agreed to everything, eager to impress her and her friends from high society in Sao Paulo. Luia refused to attend the wedding. "I'm not participating in this farce," she said over the phone. "That woman is only with him for the money, and everyone knows it, except Felipe." It was the beginning of the rift between the siblings. Felipe never forgave Luia for her absence, and she never forgave her brother for his willful blindness. The first years of marriage were a parade of extravagance. Felipe and Bianca lived like celebrities, spending fortunes on international trips, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, designer clothes. He tried once more to work in the family business, taking over the office in Cuiabá, but his interest lasted only until the next social event or trip. It was during one of those trips, when Felipe and Bianca were in Europe, that Geronimo received the diagnosis that would change everything. Pancreatic cancer, already in advanced stages. The news hit our family like a bomb. I immediately called Felipe, who promised to return on the next flight. He came back a week later, claiming issues with his tickets. The next 3 years were a constant struggle. Geronimo, always so strong, was fading before my eyes. We tried every possible treatment. We consulted specialists in Brazil and abroad. I slept in hospital chairs, learned medical terms, managed medications. My life boiled down to caring for the man who had been my partner for nearly 4 decades. Felipe showed up occasionally, always in a hurry, always with some important commitment waiting. Bianca sent expensive flower arrangements but never had time for a visit. Luia returned from England as soon as she heard the diagnosis and stayed for 2 months. But the tension with her brother was so great that Geronimo asked her to go back to London. "I don't want to see you two fighting in my last days," he said. It was during this time that Geronimo called me for a conversation that would change everything. We were at home on one of those rare good days when he could sit on the porch watching the sunset. His hand, once strong and steady, now trembled as it held mine. "Berenice, I need to talk about the will," he said, his voice weak but determined. "I don't want to discuss this now," I replied, trying to push away that painful topic. "We need to, time is running out, and you know it." Then he explained his plan to me. A plan that at first seemed cruel but hid a wisdom only a concerned father could possess. "I will leave everything to Felipe in the will," he said. "The 30 million, the farms, the businesses, everything?" I exclaimed, unable to believe it. "After everything we've seen, how he behaves, how he spends without thinking of tomorrow, let me finish," he urged, squeezing my hand. "In the main will, which will be read first, everything will go to him. But there will be an additional document, a clause that will only be mentioned later. This clause states that all the assets will remain under your control until you leave us. Felipe will receive only a modest allowance." "He's going to be furious," I murmured, already anticipating our son's reaction. "Yes, he will. And that's the point. I want to see what he will do when he thinks he has it all. I want him to show who he really is." "And if he shows his worst side?" I asked, fearing the answer. "Then he will have a chance for redemption, 30 days to show remorse and reconcile with you. If he doesn't, he will lose everything. The inheritance will be divided between Luia and Charities." I fell silent, absorbing the plan. It was simultaneously cruel and loving. The last attempt of a father to teach his son a lesson about character, about values that go beyond money. "Can you do this, Berenice?" he asked, his eyes locked on mine. "Can you be strong enough to endure what comes? To give our son this last chance to become the man I know he can be?" I looked at that man who had been my partner in building everything we had, who had faced the tough years, the sleepless nights, the uncertainties with me, who never gave up, never shied away from a challenge, and I knew I couldn't deny him this last request. "Yes," I finally replied. "I will do this for you, for us, for Felipe." Geronimo smiled, that smile that always gave me strength, even in the worst moments. "You've always been the stronger of the two of us, you know?" From the very first day, 2 weeks after that conversation, he left quietly in his sleep, as if he were just resting after a long day of work. I held his hand until the end, grateful for the years we had, silently promising to fulfill his last wish. The funeral was as he requested, simple, without ostentation, just with people who truly mattered. I noticed how Felipe barely contained his impatience during the ceremony, how Bianca accepted condolences with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. I saw the looks from Sebastio and Antonia, who knew my son and his wife's true nature better than they realized. And then, 3 days later came the reading of the will. Dr. Mauricio Pixoto, a longtime friend and family lawyer, prepared everything according to Geronimo's instructions. Only the first part would be read initially, the part that made Felipe believe he had inherited everything right away. I saw the greed shine in my son's eyes when the 30 million was mentioned. I saw how he squeezed Bianca's hand, how they exchanged knowing glances. At that moment, a grieving son and his wife were predators before a fallen prey. The next morning, Felipe showed up with the bags to kick me out. And when he shouted those horrible words, "Get out, you old hag. I don't need you for anything anymore," I knew Geronimo was right. Our son needed this lesson more than anything in the world. That question hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Felipe's expression changed instantly. It was like watching an eclipse, the shadow of doubt slowly covering his arrogant face. But before he could respond, I need to tell you what happened in the days leading up to that crucial moment. Geronimo's funeral took place on a clear Wednesday, one of those days he always said were perfect for planting. We chose the simplest chapel in town, going against many expectations. Felipe and Bianca suggested, or rather insisted, that we hold a grand ceremony at the Cathedral of Cuiaba. "Dad deserves a farewell worthy of his status," Felipe argued, but I knew what he really wanted was a spectacle to impress his friends and partners. His father left clear instructions on how he wanted to depart. I responded firmly. "And we will respect them." Geronimo had left me an envelope with his wishes for the funeral. He wanted something simple, without pompous speeches, filled with wildflowers, especially sunflowers, which had always been his favorites. He wanted to be buried in a plain navy suit, not the luxurious cedar coffin Felipe suggested. "The earth doesn't care about the wood of the coffin," Geronimo used to say. I made sure to follow every instruction. Sebastio helped me find the most beautiful sunflowers in the region, and Antonia personally took care of the suit Geronimo would wear on his final journey. We invited only those who truly played a part in our lives, farm workers, true friends, business partners who stood by us in tough times. When the day arrived, I noticed how quickly the chapel filled up. Mostly simple people, who came to pay their last respects not to the successful businessman, but to the just man many knew. I sat in the front row, watching the closed coffin. Another instruction from Geronimo. He didn't want to be remembered lying in a box, he had said. Felipe and Bianca arrived 20 minutes late, causing a small commotion as they entered. She wore a black Chanel outfit that seemed more suited for a fashion show than a funeral, with huge sunglasses that didn't hide her indifference. Felipe wore a pristine suit and carried a solemn expression that I knew was as false as the eternal love vows he made to Bianca. Throughout the ceremony, I watched my son discreetly checking his watch every 5 minutes. In a particularly moving moment, when one of the oldest farm workers spoke about how Geronimo had helped him build a house for his family, I saw Felipe and Bianca texting on their phones, their nimble fingers gliding over the screens as if they were in a meeting in Fredonia. Dr. Mauricio Pixoto sat next to me, occasionally holding my hand. "Stay strong, Berenice," he whispered. Geronimo would be proud of your dignity. I could only feel it, unable to speak. I didn't cry during the funeral. My tears had been shed in the previous months, watching my husband slowly fade away, day by day. Now I felt only a strange calm, as if a part of me knew this was just the beginning of something bigger. After the ceremony, a few guests came to the mansion for coffee. Felipe made it a point to mingle among them, shaking hands and giving pats on the back like a campaigning politician. I noticed how he gravitated especially towards the most influential partners, how his posture changed, becoming more upright, more imposing. He was already rehearsing the role of the new patriarch of the Fontana family. We will continue my father's business with the same excellence, I heard him say to an important soybean buyer. He had ambitious plans to further expand the empire he built. Bianca, for her part, moved around the room as if she were already the lady of the house. She asked Antonia to serve coffee in our best china, the one we only used on very special occasions. I saw how she caressed the antique furniture, the artworks that Geronimo and I had collected over the years, as if she were already deciding what to keep and what to discard. This sofa is so outdated, she commented to a friend, loud enough for me to hear. I'll replace it with something more contemporary as soon as I can. Sebastio shot me a look of indignation when he heard that. He knew, just as I did, that this sofa had been the first quality piece of furniture Geronimo and I bought after years of sleeping on a mattress on the floor of our small wooden house in Rondinopolis. It held priceless sentimental value. I managed to keep my composure until the last guest left. I went up to my room, the room I shared with Geronimo for nearly 4 decades, and finally allowed my body to succumb to exhaustion. I lay down still dressed, hugging his pillow, which still held his scent. I don't know how long I stayed like that, floating between consciousness and sleep, recalling moments from our life together. It was Antonia who woke me the next morning, bringing a cup of chamomile tea, as she had done every day since Geronimo fell ill. Dona Berenice, she said softly, placing the cup on the bedside table. Dr. Mauricio called, he scheduled the reading of the will for tomorrow at 10 a.m. at his office. I just felt her presence, too weak to speak. Antonia, who had been with us for over 20 years, sat on the edge of the bed and held my hand. Are you going to be okay? She asked, concern evident in her eyes. I will, Antonia, I finally replied. Geronimo and I prepared for this moment. She nodded, understanding without me needing to explain. Antonia didn't know the details of the plan, but she knew Geronimo and me well enough to understand we wouldn't leave the future to chance. Senor Felipe already knows about the reading of the will, she informed me, a slight disapproval in her voice. He and Dona Bianca seem anxious. I imagine so, I replied, trying not to show the sadness I felt thinking of my own son, more concerned with the inheritance than with the loss of his father. I spent the rest of the day in a sort of trance, wandering through the rooms of the house, touching objects that held memories of our years together. The desk where Geronimo worked late, the books we read together on rainy nights, the photographs that documented our journey from a young couple full of dreams to successful entrepreneurs. The next morning, I dressed carefully for the reading of the will. I chose a sober navy blue outfit, Geronimo's favorite color, and put on the sapphire necklace he gave me for our 40th anniversary. It was a piece of considerable value, but to me, it meant infinitely more because of its significance. We arrived at Dr. Mauricio's office a few minutes before 10. Sebastio insisted on taking me personally, worried about my emotional state. Antonia also came at my request. Geronimo had instructed them to be witnesses to what was about to unfold. Felipe and Bianca were already there, settled in the best chairs in front of Dr. Mauricio's desk. My son briefly stood when I entered, more out of obligation than respect. Bianca merely nodded, her eyes glued to her phone. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Mauricio began adjusting his glasses. We are here for the reading of Mr. Geronimo Fontana's will. He opened a thick folder and started reading the usual legal terms. I noticed Felipe leaning slightly forward when Dr. Mauricio reached the part about the distribution of assets. His eyes sparkled in a way I had never seen when Geronimo was alive. To my son Felipe Fontana, I leave the entirety of my assets, including, but not limited to, all rural and urban properties, shares in Fontana Agronegocios, stakes in other companies, bank accounts, and investments, totaling approximately 30 million Brazilian reals. Felipe squeezed Bianca's hand so tightly that the knuckles turned white. She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. The two exchanged a knowing glance that sent a shiver down my spine. Dr. Mauricio continued reading, mentioning small legacies for longtime employees, including Sebastio and Antonia. Felipe barely paid attention now, discreetly fiddling with his phone, probably already sending messages about his new financial status. When the reading ended, my son quickly stood up, extending his hand to Dr. Mauricio. "Thank you, doctor," he said with false solemnity. "My father was very generous. I promise to honor his legacy." Empty words that sounded rehearsed. Dr. Mauricio merely nodded without comment. He knew, just as I did, what was coming next. On the way back home, Felipe and Bianca followed in their own car ahead of us. Through the rearview mirror, I could see them chatting animatedly, gesturing, occasionally laughing. They weren't mourning, they were celebrating. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Sebastio asked, glancing at me through the mirror. "I am," I replied simply, "just preparing for what lies ahead." He nodded, understanding. Sebastio had known Felipe since he was a child. He saw how he grew up spoiled and selfish, despite Geronimo's efforts to teach him the value of hard work. We arrived at the mansion, and I went straight to my room. I needed a moment alone to strengthen my spirit. I knew the storm was approaching. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of doors being violently opened. Before I could react, Felipe entered my room without knocking, followed by Bianca. "Good morning, Mom," he said with a false cordiality that didn't match the hardness in his eyes. "We need to talk." I sat on the bed, adjusting my robe around my body. "What's going on, Felipe?" "Bianca and I decided we're moving here to the mansion." He announced it as if he were doing me a favor. "After all, this is the family's main house." "This is my home," I replied calmly. "Yours too, of course, but it's still my home." Felipe laughed. A cold sound that had never come from the boy I raised. "Actually, it's not anymore. The will was very clear, Mom. Everything is mine now." Bianca wandered around the room, examining personal items on the shelves, touching my jewelry on the dresser, as if she were already deciding what she would keep for herself. "We think it's best for you to move to the apartment in Cuiabá," Felipe continued. "It's smaller, but enough for someone your age." "And when do you expect me to make this move?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Felipe exchanged a glance with Bianca before answering, "Today, actually, right now." It felt like a punch in the stomach, even though I was prepared for it. Knowing my son had become a selfish man was one thing. Witnessing his cruelty firsthand was completely different. "This is ridiculous, Felipe," I argued. "Your father just passed away. This house is full of our memories." "Exactly for that reason," Bianca interjected for the first time. "We need a fresh start, new furniture, new decor, new energy." "Ah," Felipe threw an open suitcase on my bed. "You have 1 hour to pack your essentials. The rest we can send later." I tried to argue, to ask for more time, to make my son see the cruelty of his actions, but he wouldn't listen. He left the room saying he'd be back in exactly 1 hour. Antonia appeared soon after, silent tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Berenice, I heard everything. I can't believe Felipe is doing this to you." "Help me pack some clothes, Antonia," I asked, keeping my composure. "Just the essentials for now." She nodded, still crying, and began selecting pieces from my wardrobe. We worked in silence for a few minutes until she asked, "What about your jewelry?" "The ones Mr. Geronimo gave you?" "Just pack the sapphire necklace and the matching earrings," I replied. "They're special to me." An hour later, just as promised, Felipe returned. He found me sitting on the edge of the bed. 2 small suitcases beside me. Antonia was with me, holding my hand, her face marked by tears. "Are you ready?" he asked coldly. I stood up without answering and grabbed one of the suitcases. Antonia took the other, casting a disapproving glance at Felipe that he pretended not to notice. We descended the stairs in silence. In the entrance hall, I saw that Sebastio was there too, along with some other staff members who had heard the commotion. They all looked shocked, unable to believe what they were witnessing. It was at that moment, in front of everyone, that Felipe did the unthinkable, throwing my suitcases toward the door and pointing to the exit. "Get out, you old hag. I don't need you for anything anymore." A deathly silence fell over the hall. Sebastio stepped forward, fists clenched, but raised his hand to stop him. This was a moment between mother and son, no matter how painful it was. Bianca smiled next to Felipe, wearing one of my pearl necklaces, the one Geronimo gave me when we celebrated 25 years of marriage. The arrogance on her face was almost palpable. Time seemed to freeze. I felt the weight of 40 years of memories on my shoulders. Felipe's birth, his first steps, the nights I stayed awake when he had a fever, the parties I organized, the problems I solved, the doors I opened for him, all the love, all the dedication, reduced to this moment of absolute ingratitude. But strangely, I felt no anger, no sadness. I felt an almost supernatural calm, as if Geronimo were by my side, holding my hand, reminding me that everything was happening as we planned. I adjusted my sapphire necklace and, to everyone's surprise, I began to laugh. Not a nervous or hysterical laugh, but a genuine one, rising from the depths of my soul. My laughter echoed through the entrance hall, freezing everyone in place. Felipe looked at me, confused, his arrogance momentarily shaken by my unexpected reaction. And then, in the silence that followed my laughter, I asked the question that would change everything. "Did you read the entire will, my son?" The expression on his face changed instantly. A flicker of doubt, of fear, crossed his eyes, and in that moment, I knew Geronimo's plan was working exactly as he had foreseen. The most important lesson my husband wanted to teach our son was just beginning. Felipe's face paled as I saw Dr. Mauricio enter the hall, leather briefcase in hand and a serious expression on his face. "What a surprise, Doctor," my son said, trying to regain his composure. "We didn't expect to see you today." "I came at your mother's request," the lawyer replied, walking calmly toward us. "And it seems I arrived at just the right moment." Sebastio and Antonia exchanged meaningful glances, as if they knew they were about to witness something important. The other household staff remained still, sensing the tension in the air. "Mauricio," I called, adjusting my sapphire necklace with studied calm. "I think it's time to clarify a few points for my son and daughter-in-law." Bianca stepped forward, the stolen pearl necklace gleaming around her neck. "There's nothing to clarify. The will was read yesterday, just the first part of it." Dr. Mauricio corrected her, placing his briefcase on the coffee table in the hall. "As was the wish of Mr. Geronimo." "What do you mean?" "The first part?" Felipe asked, his tone wavering between arrogance and apprehension. "Is this some kind of trick?" Dr. Mauricio meticulously opened the briefcase, pulling out official documents with notarized seals. "No, Mr. Felipe. It's a perfectly legal testamentary clause, registered and validated." A heavy silence settled as the lawyer adjusted his glasses and prepared to read. I noticed a drop of sweat trickling down Felipe's temple, despite the air conditioning. "According to the express instructions of Mr. Geronimo Fontana, Dr. Mauricio began, this second part of the will is to be read only after the first reaction of the main heir to assess his character and intentions." Felipe paled even more. "This is ridiculous. It's illegal." "Actually, it's not," the lawyer replied calmly. "Wills can contain conditional clauses, and this one was carefully crafted to withstand any challenge." I looked at my son with a mix of sadness and determination. That boy I held in my arms was now a man ready to throw me out without hesitation. Geronimo was right. This lesson was necessary. Dr. Mauricio cleared his throat and began to read. I, Geronimo Fontana, in full possession of my mental faculties, establish that all the assets mentioned earlier in this will shall remain under the exclusive control of my wife, Berenice Fontana, until the day of her passing. Bianca let out a strangled sound, something between a sigh and a scream. Felipe stood frozen, as if struck by a physical blow. During this period, the lawyer continued, my son Felipe will receive a monthly allowance of 5 minimum wages for his support, conditioned on his respectful and cooperative behavior towards his mother. This can't be true, Felipe murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Mauricio ignored the interruption. This clause was created to ensure not only my wife's financial security, who was fundamental in building our entire wealth, but also to provide an opportunity for personal and moral growth for my son. I looked around and saw the faces of the staff, some hiding discreet smiles, others watching in shock at the unfolding scene. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Felipe will have 30 days from this reading to show genuine remorse for any inappropriate behavior and reconcile with his mother. If he fails to do so, he will completely lose the right to any future inheritance, which will be divided among selected charities and my daughter Luia Fontana. The document fell from Felipe's trembling hands when Dr. Mauricio handed it to him for confirmation. Bianca caught it mid-air, her eyes frantically scanning the written lines, searching for any loophole, any escape. Page 7, paragraph 3. I pointed out calmly, just as your father told me it would be. Felipe stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. You knew this all along? I let you show who you really are. I added. Yes. That was exactly what your father wanted, to see your true character revealed when you thought you had all the power. Bianca let out a nervous laugh, breaking the tense silence. This is absurd. We'll contest it. No judge will validate a will with such manipulative conditions. Dr. Mauricio closed the folder with a decisive motion. Mrs. Bianca, I can assure you this document was drafted with extreme legal care. 3 of the most respected legal experts in the country reviewed it. It is shielded against any challenge. Felipe staggered to the nearest sofa and collapsed onto it, running his hands through his hair in despair. 30 million. All in her hands until I die. I finished without bitterness in my voice. Yes, Felipe. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. He knew you better than you think. Bianca stood still for a few seconds, alternating her gaze between the document in her hands, Felipe defeated on the sofa, and me. Then, with a sudden movement, she ripped the pearl necklace from her own neck. 30 days, she murmured, more for herself than for us. What if you live another 30 years? Her calculating eyes assessed me from head to toe, as if estimating my life expectancy. I recognized that look, the same one she had when she was assessing the price of a designer bag or an imported car. You're 67, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Can you live another 20, 30 years? I won't wait. She turned to Felipe, her face twisted in a mix of disappointment and anger. You told me we'd be millionaires today, that we could buy that house in Miami, travel the world, live as we always deserved. Felipe tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away as if burned. Bianca, love, let's find a solution. Maybe we can negotiate with my mother, make a deal, negotiate? She practically spat the word. I didn't marry to negotiate, I married to have the life you promised. With a fluid motion, Bianca took off her ring and threw it into Felipe's lap. The small circle of white gold, which had cost a small fortune, bounced off his leg and fell silently onto the Persian rug. Is it over, Felipe? She declared, grabbing her Hermes bag from the side table. Call me when you really have the millions you promised. The sound of Bianca's heels echoed on the marble of the entryway as she headed for the door. No one moved to stop her. When the door slammed hard enough to make the crystals of the chandelier tinkle, a heavy silence filled the room. Felipe remained still, staring at the empty space where Bianca had been just seconds before. His face had lost all color, and for the first time in many years, I saw my son without his mask of arrogance. He looked lost, like the boy who ran into my arms after falling off his bike. She'll come back, he murmured, more to himself than to any of us. She's just upset. She'll calm down and come back. No one responded. We all knew the truth. Bianca never loved Felipe, she only loved the money he represented. Without the promise of immediate wealth, there was no reason for her to stay. Dr. Mauricio broke the silence with his gentle yet firm voice. Mr. Felipe, I suggest you read the rest of the document carefully. There are important details about your obligations and rights during this 30-day period. Felipe didn't respond. His gaze still fixed on the door through which Bianca had exited. Antonia approached timidly, offering him a glass of water, which he accepted mechanically. Sebastio, who had been watching everything with an impassive expression, finally spoke up. Shall I take your bags back to the room, Mrs. Berenice? Yes, please, Sebastio, I replied, grateful for the normalcy of the question amidst the emotional chaos. As Sebastio went upstairs with my bags, Felipe finally turned his eyes to me. What I saw there broke my heart. A mix of anger, shame, and surprisingly, pain. Genuine pain. Why? He asked, his voice choked. Why did you do this to me? I slowly approached and sat beside him on the sofa, keeping some distance. It wasn't to humiliate you, Felipe. It was to teach you. Teach me, he bitterly repeated, making me seem like a fool, letting me lose my wife. She was already lost, I replied softly. Or rather, she was never really yours. You just couldn't see it. That's not true, he protested, but without conviction. Felipe, I called, waiting until his eyes met mine. Think carefully. Did she love you or the money you represented? He looked away, unable to face the obvious truth. A solitary tear rolled down his face, the first I had seen since Geronimo's illness began. Your father and I built everything from scratch. I continued. There was nothing when we started. Just land, hard work, and each other. The money came later, much later. It was a consequence. No, a goal. I know that, Felipe murmured. You've told that story 1,000 times, but you never understood. I replied. You never grasped the value of what we built because you always had everything handed to you. You never had to fight for anything. Dr. Mauricio, sensing the intimacy of the moment, discreetly gestured for the staff to leave. In a few moments, it was just Felipe, me, and the painful truths that needed to be said. Your father was worried, I continued. He saw how you dealt with money, with people, with responsibilities. He saw that you weren't ready to take on everything we built. So he decided to humiliate me. Felipe bitterly concluded. I didn't correct him firmly. He decided to give you a chance to show who you really are when you think no one is watching. And then a chance to correct your mistakes. Felipe fell silent, absorbing my words. Through the window, I saw Bianca's car speeding away from the property, kicking up dust on the dirt road leading to the main gate. She's not coming back, is she? He asked, following my gaze. I didn't answer honestly. And maybe that's for the best. Felipe let out a sound that was half a sigh, half a sob. Suddenly, he seemed much smaller sitting on that huge sofa, as if all his false confidence had been drained away at once. What happens now? He finally asked. That depends on you, I replied. The will is clear. You have 30 days to show genuine remorse and reconcile with me. Otherwise, you lose everything. And if I contest it, take it to court. You can try, I replied calmly. But your father was meticulous in everything he did. Dr. Mauricio ensured that the document is indisputable. Felipe fell silent again, his eyes fixed on his own hands. Hands that had never known the hard work that calloused his father's. 30 days, he repeated. To prove what? That I'm worthy of the fortune? I didn't correct him. To prove you're worthy of the Fontana name, that you understand the true value of what your father built. Not just the money, but the legacy, the reputation, the respect. Something changed in Felipe's expression. A flicker of understanding, perhaps. He slowly stood up, still avoiding my gaze. I need to think," he murmured. "To be alone for a while." "Of course," I agreed. "Your room is just the same." He hesitated as if he wanted to say something more, but then simply nodded and trudged up the stairs. I watched him until he disappeared down the hallway, carrying the weight of the revelations from that morning. Dr. Mauricio, who had discreetly retreated to the adjoining room, returned when Felipe left. "It was as Geronimo predicted," he commented, sitting beside me. "Every reaction, every word." "My husband knew our son better than he knows himself," I replied, feeling a pang of sadness. "But we still don't know how this will end." "Do you think he will change?" the lawyer asked with genuine interest. I looked at Bianca's rings, still lying on the carpet, a small circle of white gold symbolizing empty promises and a love that never really existed. "I hope so," I replied honestly. Geronimo's plan wasn't to punish Felipe but to save him from himself, to give him the chance to become the man we know he can be. Dr. Mauricio smiled gently. "Geronimo always said you were the true strength of this family." Now I see he was right. As the lawyer said his goodbyes, I sat alone in the entryway, listening to the distant sounds of the house. Antonia in the kitchen, Sebastio giving instructions to the gardeners outside, the pendulum clock marking the inexorable passage of time. The journey had just begun. The next 30 days would define not only the fate of the Fontana fortune but also the future of my son. And whether Geronimo's final plan could bring back the boy we once knew, hidden beneath layers of arrogance and privilege. I adjusted my sapphire necklace and smiled faintly. Geronimo would be proud. The most important lesson he wanted to teach our son was underway. And I would do my part to honor his last wish. The true legacy of the Fontanas wasn't the millions in properties and investments, it was the character, integrity, and values we built over a lifetime. And that was the only legacy that truly mattered. The 3 days following the will's revelation were marked by an oppressive silence in the mansion. Felipe locked himself in his room, only coming out for quick meals that he barely touched. When we crossed paths in the hallways, he would look away as if he couldn't face the truth my eyes carried. None of us mentioned Bianca, who had vanished as if she had never been part of our lives. On the morning of the 4th day, while I was having my coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise over the gardens Geronimo had personally designed, I heard hesitant footsteps approaching. Felipe appeared, deep circles under his eyes, unshaven, wearing the same clothes from 2 days ago. "Can I sit?" he asked, pointing to the empty chair beside me. I nodded, pouring him a cup of coffee without asking. He accepted it with a murmured thanks. The first kind word he had spoken to me in weeks. "Bianca called yesterday," he finally broke the silence, "to ask for a divorce." I didn't show surprise. "I'm sorry," I replied. And part of me truly felt sorry, not for Bianca, but for the pain I saw in my son's eyes. "Don't feel sorry," he forced a smile. "You were right. She never loved me. She said she's going back to Sao Paulo, that she found an older businessman who can meet her needs." He made air quotes, not even waiting for the ink on our marriage certificate to dry properly. We sat in silence for a few moments, the bird songs filling the void between us. Felipe spun the cup in his hands, his eyes fixed on the dark liquid. "I've been thinking these days," he continued, "about Dad, about you, about everything that happened." I remained silent, allowing him to find his own words. "At first, I was furious. I thought you had conspired against me, that it was an unnecessary cruelty." He hesitated, but then I started to remember how my father always tried to teach me about hard work, about values, lessons I never listened to. Felipe lifted his eyes, meeting mine for the first time in days. I recalled that moment. I must have been around 14 when I asked for an imported motorcycle. My father said I needed to work to earn it. He offered to pay half if I worked on the farm during the holidays to make up the rest. I remembered that episode perfectly. "You worked for 3 days and then gave up. And 2 weeks later, you bought the motorcycle for me," he added, a hint of shame in his voice. Against my father's wishes. I felt my face heat up. It was true. I had sabotaged Geronimo's lessons for years. I sent Felipe away when I should have reinforced my husband's teachings. We both made mistakes, son. I admitted, I also have my share of blame in who you've become. He shook his head slowly. That doesn't justify how I treated you. The things I said. No, it doesn't justify. I agreed. My voice was firm, but without bitterness, but I understand why it happened. Felipe set the cup down on the table and stood up, walking to the balcony railing. With his back to me, his shoulders seemed to carry the weight of the world. I don't know if I can change, he confessed, so quietly I could barely hear. I don't know if I know how to be different. I got up and walked over to him, stopping at his side. I didn't touch him. The chasm between us was still too wide for that. No one is asking you to change overnight, I replied. Your father knew it would be a process, which is why the 30 days. And what if I fail? The vulnerability in his voice reminded me of the boy he once was. Then you'll have to find your own way without the Fontana fortune to support you. He nodded slowly, absorbing the reality of the situation. What should I do? Where do I start? It was the first time in years I saw him genuinely seeking guidance, not demanding, not manipulating, truly asking. Why don't you start by getting to know what your father built? I suggested, not the properties or the numbers in the bank accounts, but the people, the work, the land. That very afternoon, Sebastio welcomed Felipe to the Horizontes farm with visible surprise. I watched from a distance as our foreman, initially skeptical, began to show my son the operations. Felipe, awkward in boots that clearly had never been worn, stumbled occasionally on the uneven ground, but he persisted. In the following days, an unexpected routine took shape. Felipe woke up before dawn, something he had never done willingly, and left with Sebastio for different properties. He returned at dusk, exhausted, sunburned, but strangely calmer than I had ever seen him. A week later, during dinner, he casually remarked, "Did you know Joaquim, who takes care of the North Sector, has worked with us for 22 years? He told me how my father helped him when his daughter got sick. He paid for all her treatment. Your father always took care of those who worked with us." I replied. To him, they weren't employees, they were family. Felipe nodded thoughtfully. He knew everyone's names, their wives, their children. I barely know how many people work for us. 1237, I replied promptly, on the farms, in the businesses, here at the house, each with their own story. Each one is part of who we are. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. How do you know all of this? Because I have always been by your father's side. Not just as a wife, but as a partner. I hesitated before continuing. Do you think a company this size builds itself? While your father took care of planting and harvesting, I managed the numbers, the contracts, the people. Something changed in Felipe's gaze, as if he were truly seeing me for the first time. I thought you were just his wife, he admitted, embarrassed. The mother who stayed at home. Many think that, I replied without resentment. It's convenient for the world to see women as mere supporting characters. Your father never saw me that way. The next morning, Felipe surprised me by knocking on the door of the office I kept in the mansion, the place where, for decades, I managed the family's finances while Geronimo handled the operations. I want to learn, he simply said, about the business, about what you do. I cleared a space on the desk, cluttered with papers, spreadsheets, and reports. Where do you want to start? In the following 2 weeks, we established a new routine. Mornings in the office with me, learning about contracts, investments, financial management, afternoons on the farms with Sebastio, understanding the operational side. For the first time, Felipe showed genuine interest, asked questions, took notes, took on small responsibilities. On a rainy Wednesday, while we reviewed financial reports, Felipe pointed to a specific item. Why are we spending so much on the scholarship program for employees' children? Your father believed in education as transformation. I explained. Every employee's child who wants to study has a guaranteed scholarship from elementary school to university. But that costs millions a year, he observed, surprised. And it pays off in loyalty, in quality of life, in stronger communities around our properties. I replied, it's not charity, Felipe, it's an investment in the future. He reflected for a moment. I never thought of it that way. Your father did, I replied softly. For him, success wasn't measured just by profit. The next day, Felipe asked to visit one of the schools supported by the Family Foundation. I accompanied him, curious to see his reaction. The small rural school, 30 kilometers from the farm headquarters, served children from various nearby communities. When we arrived, we were greeted by the principal, an energetic woman who didn't hide her surprise at seeing Felipe. Mr. Fontana, what an unexpected honor. Your father used to visit us regularly, but I confess we didn't expect to see you. Felipe seemed uncomfortable with the remark. I'm trying to learn more about the family projects, he explained without elaborating. During the visit, I noticed a gradual change in his demeanor. Initially tense and distant, he began to relax while interacting with the teachers and especially with the children. A girl of about 8 approached shyly. Are you Mr. Geronimo's son? She asked. Felipe knelt to be at her level. I am. Did you know my father? He used to come read stories to us. She replied, her eyes shining. He did different voices for each character. It was so funny. I saw the shock on Felipe's face. This was a side of Geronimo he clearly didn't know, the powerful businessman who made funny voices for kids in a rural school. On the way back, he remained silent for several kilometers. I didn't know, he finally said. About the school, about the readings, he never mentioned. Your father didn't do those things for recognition. I explained. He did it because he believed it was the right thing to do. That night, I found Felipe in the library, surrounded by old photo albums, images of Geronimo Jevem, from our early years together, from the growth of the farms. Felipe looked at me with teary eyes. How could I have known so little about my own father? I sat beside him, gazing at one particular photo. Geronimo holding baby Felipe in his arms, pride radiating from his face. He loved you so much. He simply said, everything he did, including this will, was out of love. On the 25th day after the will was revealed, I received an unexpected call. Luia, my daughter, who lived in London, was at the Cuiaba airport. I'm coming back, Mom, she said, her voice mixed with background noise. I knew what had happened. I need to be there with you. I sent Sebastio to pick her up, and hours later, I held my daughter in my arms after almost 2 years apart. Luia looked thinner, more serious, but her eyes, so much like Geronimo's, still sparkled with the same determination. How did you know? I asked once we calmed down. Dr. Mauricio called me, she explained. He thought I should know. That night, I prepared a special dinner, the first time we would be together as a family since Geronimo's death. Felipe walked into the dining room and froze upon seeing his sister Luia. He murmured clearly, unsure how to react. My daughter slowly stood up. For a tense moment, I thought she might lash out at him verbally. The resentment between them had been deep for years. Instead, to my surprise, she walked over to him and hugged him. I'm sorry about Dad, she simply said. I saw Felipe's shoulders tremble slightly as he returned his sister's embrace. It dawned on me then that amidst all the drama of the will and the inheritance, he had never truly mourned the loss of his father. The dinner started awkwardly, with cautious conversations about safe topics. The weather in London, the recent rains in Mato Grosso. Gradually, the tension eased. Luia talked about her work at the investment bank. Felipe shared what he was learning on the farms. It felt like we were all relearning how to be a family. After dessert, Felipe cleared his throat nervously. I have something to say, he announced, looking at me and then at Luia. In these last few days, I've learned more about our father, about the business, about our family than in my entire life. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I realized how foolish, arrogant, and ungrateful I had been. His voice faltered slightly. The things I said to you, Mom, the way I treated you, I have no excuses. Felipe. I started, but he raised his hand. Please, let me finish. I need to say this. He took a deep breath. I spent years thinking I deserved everything just for being Geronimo Fontana's son. I never understood that the name I carry comes with responsibilities, not just privileges. Luia nodded slightly, her eyes fixed on her brother. I don't know if I can be the man our father would have wanted me to be, Felipe continued. But I want to try, not for the 30 million, not for the inheritance, but because I finally understand what he tried to teach me my whole life. Silence followed his words. It was Luia who broke him. True change takes time, Felipe, she said surprisingly gently. It doesn't happen in 30 days. I know, he replied, looking at his own hands. That's why, he hesitated. That's why I decided to give up the inheritance. I was stunned. What? I want to carve my own path, he explained. Start from scratch, like you all did. Prove to myself that I can. I exchanged a glance with Luia, who looked equally surprised. That's not what your father wanted, I finally responded. He didn't want to punish you, Felipe. He wanted you to understand the value of what we've built. And I'm starting to understand, he said, but I need to do it my way. The next day, Felipe, Luia, and I met with Dr. Mauricio to discuss the next steps. To the lawyer's surprise, Felipe stood by his decision. I want to work in the family businesses, but as a regular employee, he explained, starting from the bottom, no privileges. Dr. Mauricio looked at me for guidance. I nodded slightly. That can be arranged. The lawyer replied, taking notes. As for your share of the future inheritance, it will be held in a trust? Felipe responded, when I prove to myself, not to others, that I'm worthy of it, then we'll talk again. That afternoon, as the sun set over the Horizontes farm, I walked alone to the small grove of IP trees that Geronimo had planted when we got married. The trees, now majestic, bloomed in vibrant yellow, covering the ground with a golden carpet. Did you make it, my love? I murmured to the wind. His plan worked better than we could have imagined. I felt a presence beside me and turned to find Felipe, watching the trees with a serene expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. Did Dad plant these trees? He asked. Yes, one for every year he planned to spend with me. I smiled at the memory. He said he wanted to live long enough to see them all bloom and thrive. Felipe draped his arm over my shoulders. The first spontaneous gesture of affection in so long it nearly made me cry. He made it, my son said softly, in more ways than I imagined. We stayed like that for a long moment, mother and son, reconciled under the trees that symbolized Geronimo's love and foresight. The sun cast golden rays through the branches, illuminating the path ahead of us. A path we finally seemed ready to walk together. This wasn't the end of the Fontana story, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that Geronimo, in his wisdom, had written for us from beyond. A testament that, in the end, wasn't about money or property, but about values, character, and redemption. And I, Berenice Fontana, at 67, was ready for this new journey. Thus ends another chapter of my life. A chapter that began with pain and ended with hope. When my husband Geronimo died, I thought the worst pain would be losing the man I loved for 40 years. I never imagined my own son, Felipe, would try to kick me out of the house we built together, calling me an old hag while his gold-digging wife Bianca was already wearing my jewelry. But Geronimo, my life partner, knew me too well. He knew I would have the strength to face this difficult moment and understood our son better than anyone. He knew Felipe needed this lesson to finally grow up and become the man he could be. When I saw my son's face change, realizing he hadn't read the entire will, that the 30 million reis would be under my control until my death, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the person he had become. Relief knowing Geronimo's plan could save him. Bianca's sudden departure was painful for Felipe, but necessary, as they used to say on the farm when I was young. Sometimes you have to pull out the thorn for the wound to heal. She never loved him, only the fortune he represented. And when the money disappeared, so did her love. The following 30 days were a journey of self-discovery for my son. He explored the farms he had never valued. He talked to employees who had worked with us for decades. He discovered the rural school where his father read stories to the children. Felipe finally saw the true legacy of Geronimo Fontana. Not the money, but the values, respect, integrity. The arrival of Luia, my daughter living in London, completed our family circle. Seeing my 2 children reconciled after years of resentment was a gift I never expected to receive. And Felipe's decision to forego his inheritance to carve his own path showed that the transformation had been deeper than any of us could have imagined. Today, 2 years after those events, our family is different. Felipe works in the businesses, starting as an administrative assistant and rising through his own merit. Luia decided to stay in Brazil, bringing her international experience to help expand our ventures. And I continue to manage everything, now with the joy of seeing my children grow as individuals, not just as heirs. Bianca, I recently learned, is already on her 3rd marriage to wealthy men. I hold no resentment towards her. She was merely the instrument fate used to teach my son a lesson. Sebastio and Antonia remain with us, more like family than employees, witnesses to our entire journey. The mansion in Cuiabá, which I almost lost, is livelier than ever. Luia brought her youthful energy. Felipe is building a smaller house at the back of the property. He insists he wants his own space but doesn't want to be far from us. Sometimes I catch him gazing at Geronimo's portrait in the library, as if silently conversing with his father. The will my husband left was much more than a legal document. It was his last act of love, both for me and for our son. Geronimo knew that wealth without character is a curse, not a blessing. He didn't just want to preserve our fortune, he wanted to save our son's soul. On warm nights in Mato Grosso, I sit on the porch and look at the stars, the same ones Geronimo and I watched when we were young and dreamed of our future. I am grateful for everything we lived, for the lessons we learned, for the family that, after nearly falling apart, found its way back to unity. This story I've shared with you is not just about money or inheritance, it's about values, choices, and the true meaning of family. It's about how sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters. Many ask me if I've forgiven Felipe for his cruel words, for how he treated me that fateful day. The truth is, yes, I have forgiven him. Not because the words didn't hurt, they hurt deeply, but because I saw true remorse in his eyes, in his actions, in the person he became afterward. Forgiveness is not a gift we give to others, it's a gift we give to ourselves. Holding on to grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. I learned this from Geronimo, who was never one to hold on to resentment, even when he had reasons to do so. Our story could have ended tragically, a family destroyed by greed, selfishness, and empty materialism. Instead, it became a story of redemption, of second chances, of love that endures even in the toughest times. If there's one lesson I hope you take from this story, it's that it's never too late to change, to correct mistakes, to strive to be a better person. Felipe was 42 when he finally understood what his father had tried to teach him his whole life. I was 67 when I discovered a strength within me that I didn't know existed. I see from your comments that many of you have been through similar situations. Perhaps not involving millions of reais, but certainly involving values, family, and tough decisions. Each story you share in the comments touches me deeply, making me feel that we are not alone in our struggles. That's the power of stories. They connect us, helping us understand that despite our different circumstances, we share the same human emotions, challenges, and hopes. If my story resonated with you in any way, I ask you to leave your comment below. Tell me where you're from, if you've experienced something similar, and what you thought of the ending. Your comments are the heart of this channel. They motivate me to keep sharing my experiences. I also ask you to give this video a like. Believe me, this simple gesture makes all the difference in helping more people discover the channel and the stories we share here. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Click the subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell to be alerted whenever a new video is released. We have many more life stories to share, some sad, some joyful, all deeply human. I know that creating quality content takes time and dedication. So, if this story touched your heart and you can contribute, consider supporting the channel through Value Demace, a way to donate that helps us cover production costs and allows us to bring more videos daily. Your contribution, no matter how small, makes a big difference in keeping this space for real and moving stories alive. I am immensely grateful to each of you who watched until now, to everyone who felt moved, reflected, perhaps even shed a tear with the story of this 67-year-old woman who faced her own son's betrayal and found a path to forgiveness and reconciliation. I'm Berenice Fontana, and this was my story on the channel. See you in the next tale with another real story that will touch your heart.